Well, Catherine Macaulay.
She's from Dublin, Ireland, and she was the founder of the Sisters of Mercy.
As far as her early life or key experiences, I think I would identify a couple there. One thing is, because of deaths in her family, she experienced both prosperity and poverty. She knew what it was like to be doing fine and then suddenly to be virtually, but not quite exactly, homeless, and then to regain some prosperity. She lived with the Callahans for almost 20 years. And the fact that Mrs. Callahan asked her to read to her from the Bible made Catherine much more familiar with the scripture, and that came into play very distinctly in her later years as she was founding a religious community. She became very sensitive to the need for Catholics to understand their faith. I think those incidents made her very empathetic with people. Mr. Callahan's will left everything to Catherine. Catherine received the whole estate and any of the investments or holdings that Mr. Callahan had when he died. So this gave her the opportunity to begin to realize a dream that she'd had for a while. And she decided to build what today would be called a settlement house or a neighborhood center, where she could have classrooms to teach children. She could provide safe housing for young girls who were coming into the city looking for work. And it could be a center from which she and other volunteers would go out to visit the sick.
And they're opening up a house of mercy for women of good character who are trying to make their way in the city. And they were a large part about trying to reestablish and shore up the Catholic faith in Ireland.
When she built the House of Mercy, one of the first things she wanted to provide was safe housing for young women. But in addition, she wanted to provide schooling. She'd already had some experience teaching herself. And she wanted to provide some living quarters for what she hoped would be a number of women who would volunteer.
They helped women and children find shelter and provide them with education.
She saw that education was a key that would open a lot of doors.
Charism is a church word. For Catherine and for the Sisters of Mercy, we would identify our charism, or the gift that was given to Catherine for the good of the church, as one of empathy, compassion, trying to make visible our belief in the mercy of God and to extend the mercy of God to others, especially perhaps to those least likely to feel it. One of the things that she was very anxious for the Sisters of Mercy to do was to respond to need as it presented itself.
These were women who had a passion for helping and for making a difference.
Different women would rise who had a sense of call from God, a sense of vocation, and very often their desire was to have a group of women who would respond to the needs of the poor, who would live that gospel message of whatever you do to the least, you do to me. So the term walking sisters started in Ireland as a kind of derisive term. Oh, they say they're sisters, but look, they're out walking about the town. They can't be. So these are the walking sisters, that kind of thing.
There was a realization that in order to be really effective, the sisters had to be just as proficient as everyone else who taught in colleges or universities.
They'd be actually practicing what they're preaching.
They were the primary teaching force at the university. At that time, they couldn't just call in on some other professor to come do it. It was their responsibility to be able to do it.
They're from all different backgrounds. They could have been teachers, nurses, doctors, any background. They used the skills that they had to help the people. You see them everywhere. You may not know it, but
They are on the streets ministering to people, visiting the sick.
There was a challenge of doing what they wanted to do when sisters, nuns, were not supposed to be doing that.
Opportunities for women were very limited, and much of that limitation came as a result of lack of education.
They were not supposed to be out and about on the streets visiting the sick or discovering that there were women who needed a safe place to stay. There was a lot of tension, animosity between Protestants and Catholics.
This is a time when you have convent burnings.
The expansion of the Sisters of Mercy goes back to the idea that there were several different kinds of works that they would undertake in response to need.
They came because they were invited. There was a Bishop O'Connor of Pittsburgh who was particularly looking for Irish sisters and the Sisters of Mercy to minister.
And help work with the poor in their areas, start schools, maybe open a hospice or a hospital, or look after orphans, or do those things which they saw that their people were in need of.
I guess stressing the need that maybe women in a different country need help.
Mother Macaulay had a vision of making a difference in the world, but she was driven by a love for Christ. She was a woman who fell in love with Christ, and because she loved Christ, she loved everyone whom Christ loves.
She was a charismatic leader. She inspired people to be the best that they could be, to want to do more. So yes, convent life had its rules, but Catherine didn't lead by rules. She led by example and by the encouragement of others.